All right, I'll go ahead and let folks in. Morning or good afternoon, everybody. It's 1 o'clock. I think that's afternoon. It's real great to see you. We're letting folks in from the waiting room right now. Appreciate y'all getting here right on time. Welcome. Welcome to the 6th and final for now in our disaster resiliency series, co-hosted by the Central Appalachia Network, as well as Reimagine Appalachia. We're so grateful to have y'all here today, as well as very grateful for our excellent round of speakers that we have joining us today for a webinar focused on how we tell the story around disasters, as well as climate resiliency in the region. Our previous webinars touched on issues such as nature-based hazard mitigation, the work of mutual aid networks, and other how to get federal aid and how to navigate the federal landscape around flooding funding and other issues. And those can all be found on our website at Reimagine Appalachia, as well as the CAN Network's website under past events. Today, we're going to talk about the need for collecting the stories of the impacts of disaster in our region, the solutions we want to see, the ways we want to tell our stories together, and the power in telling our stories as communities. All of our efforts to improve our community's resilience to flooding and other natural disasters is part of the work to increase resources for response, recovery, resiliency, and healing as a community, and the foundation of all of our work to build the bright future that we all want to build for Appalachia and for our towns. So I'm really grateful for all the work of our speakers that are coming at this important work from different angles, with the through line of capturing the stories, capturing these moments, capturing the impacts in our stories. So with that, I want to dive right into it and hear from Lacey Hale first. Lacey is a nationally recognized award-winning painter, muralist, and printmaker based in Eastern Kentucky. Lacey, I think you want to start us with a little video about your work. Is that right?
Yeah. So I have been working on a mosaic for the past like 3 or 4 months, and so I would like to start with that.
Great. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I realized I forgot to do the polling at the top of the call, but let's do your video.
Sure.
That's okay. That's okay. It's all good. It's all good. Let's do your video. Just as Liam is getting started, just a couple, pause it for a second, Liam. Just a couple things. You can enable closed captioning on our calls if that allows you to see it better. You can also translate those closed captions. So I want to draw y'all's attention to that as we're getting started. To do that, you can click on the captions, or you may need to click the more button. That's like 3 little dots at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. And that's how you can enable those closed captions. I also just want to let y'all know we do record these webinars, and we will share all the links that are dropped in the notes with folks who attend the webinar. So no need to capture all of that. Just as that video is loading, wanted to let y'all know that. And then, yeah, let's get started with the video. Thank you, Liam. Is there supposed to be sound? I can't hear the sound.
And
How about now?
we
Yes.
offset some of the damage. The building we're in is Appalachian Groundswell, which is a stream mitigation business. So this space has been focused on streams in East Kentucky, mitigation, and how we offset some of the damage that has happened over the years with that. So it felt like a natural fit for this space. to include the streams. We have been very fortunate in our work and our roles with Lacey Hale. We have not officially, but have jokingly referred to her as Callan Community Center Artist Laureate.
Valerie Horn from Callan Community Action Group. She contacted me and asked if I would be interested in doing a mural project behind their building, the old post office here in town. And it was like a retaining wall back there. And so I was like, sure, that sounds great. And so we talked about it, and they wanted it to kind of like commemorate the flood, but also honor the people here, the grit, the strength, and just the area in general. So they asked for it to include a stream and native flora and fauna from the area. And then she asked me if I could do it in mosaic. And I was like, I guess I'll give it a shot because I've never done mosaics before. Just thinking about all the different pieces that can go into a mosaic. And so as I was doing research, I realized, oh, you can use rocks, you can use jewelry, you can use broken ceramics. And so I mentioned it to Valerie that I had a mug of my dad's, who passed away in 2008. And I got that mug and I used that mug, and then I broke that mug. So I couldn't bring myself to part with the mug. And so I told Valerie that I had this mug of my dad's and I would like to put it in the mosaic. And so from that, it kind of grew into, wouldn't it be cool to ask people in the community to bring their own broken treasures to donate into this piece. It didn't really start to take off until I wrote a little piece and took a picture of my mug of my dad's that I wanted to put in there. And I think at that point, it connected with people on a different level, and they're like, oh, I could donate a piece of something that means a lot to me and contribute to this public art piece. So I put it out there and people started bringing pieces in. Some people have just brought things because they wanted to have something in it. They're like, I saw this, I thought of this project. I want to be a part of it. There's been people who've brought their grandma's earrings, their mother who has passed away for 50 years, a vase that she had. My mom contributed a pick of my dad's because he played guitar. It's just been so much, and it's been a way for me too to learn about people in the community that I might not have been able to meet before. It was a gift. My last day of work as an orthopedic rehab nurse on the unit care, and the nurses, it's a gift from them. Okay, that I work with. So to me, it's a gift of love from the angel. Nurses are like angels watching over us. That's very true. This is such a neat ideal, and it will go on forever watching over. Nothing. I think it'll watch over. Oh, those angels watching over. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll definitely, it'll be, actually, the wings would be so pretty, and the kingfisher wings, don't you think? That texture is. I think that'll be great. It's just an honor that they trust me with the pieces that they bring, and I hope I do them all justice. I think that anytime a piece like this can happen, it's showing that art can be healing, it can be therapeutic, it can beautify a space, this gray concrete wall. So it can really add interest. People come down and take photos with it. They, are just proud to have it and be part of it. And with this one in particular, with the stories included, it's like an archive of the community and what they found important and beautiful. Projects like this really get people thinking of different ways of like what art can be and why it's important, and what it can do for their community and for themselves.
So yeah, that's a project that I had not seen coming my way. thank you all for the kind words, and it's been a piece that has turned into something really very incredible. People have shipped things to me from like people who had lived here or had family members who had lived here. They have shipped me, like one person shipped their aunts. She was a ceramicist, and they shipped her bowl because they wanted to have a piece here. And this person lived in New Jersey. And we're collecting all these stories and compiling them. So I think Dana dropped in the chat, you can actually go to, right now we have a Canva website, but we're going to put the website on Cowan Community Action Group's website. But we're collecting all the stories. So it'll be an archive of the community. And I wanted to thank and also mention that Mimi Pickering, she's a filmmaker. She created that video with Teresa Collins for Center for Rural Strategies. They have a living traditions project that they were working on, and they thought the mural would be a good project to include. I keep saying mural because I usually do community murals. But this piece, like I said, it's just grown into something that I never could imagine. And I feel so blessed and lucky to be a part of it. You can see how important this has become to a lot of the people in the community. The flood here in 2022 really affected so many of us. And I think the Stream of Stories project shows how these little pieces from people all over this community and this area can contribute and make a larger piece of something beautiful and create, I mean, that's how community is created, right? With all of us trying to do our best and help each other and make something beautiful. And it's really created excuse me, I think a sense of hope that we can all create something together and enjoy it and care for each other that way. So yeah, I invite you all to check out the stories on the Canva site and just learn a little bit more about the community here. And it's really been something special. And I'm just really lucky and grateful that I can lead this sort of project. Dana, I guess that's all I've got.
I have a question for you, because I know you've done so many murals and a lot of them have had community engagement as part of them. I wonder if there are kind of lessons you've learned as far as how you bring folks into those conversations, or how you try to make the work that you do that ends up having such a prominent and exciting role in the community, reflect that community back. Does that question make sense? Yeah.
I think so. I mean, I think I try to create pieces that people, because previously it's all been paint. I've only ever used paint, and I have usually done pieces that are almost like a paint by number in a lot of ways, so people can feel comfortable. And they want to be a lot of people want to be a part of pieces like this because they can go back and look at it and say, hey, look what I did, look what the community did, and it makes something really beautiful and something they can be a part of. Last summer, because this was created technically through a Growing Home initiative through Cowan. And since the flood, the past 2 years, we've created a piece of community art. So last summer we painted the stairway that went up to the old high school, and we did a redbud tree growing up the stairs, and there's a stream flowing down the stairs the same way. So they're kind of like, this tree is growing, these roots are, it's growing tall and it's reaching for the sun. There's a sun at the top. And then I was actually working with an intern at the time, and she was like, why don't, because we were doing a community, like a community paint by number. And then she had this idea. She was in high school, and it just blew my mind. She's like, what if, because a redbud has little buds, right? It's like little tiny buds on the tree. And she was like, what if community members could dip their thumbprints in paint and then put that on the tree itself? And so we did that project. And I use social media a lot to get the word out for things like this, and people really if you can make that connect, like there's a connection there of like, this is something that's important and they can be a part of. A lot of the time, I think people that really I don't know, it creates an excitement that they want to be a part of that. So there was a ton of people that came out. Even there was like a 60-year anniversary of a graduation party for that project last year, and they came out. Some of the women from that group came and wanted to put their fingerprints on the project. So does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
That's really beautiful. Yeah, I appreciate that. That's such a cool, yeah. No,
Because
that's
I think,
wonderful.
yeah, I mean, there's, I feel like a lot of the time with my work, I really want to, because I've lived in Appalachia, I've lived in Kentucky most of my life. I was born here, and I just see so many good things and so many things that we can improve on, but I think public art can really have such an effect on people. And I've seen I also think of it kind of as like a art education project, because people want to know what you're doing, and they want to stop and ask questions and help. Even if I'm not doing like a public piece, a community piece that is in the public, people still want to, like, I've had people be like, can I just paint just a little bit just to say that I helped on that? So I think it's a really uplifting way to show a community and to involve a community in their own beautification, if that makes sense.
I do. I do. No, I love that. And thank you, Lacey. And if y'all have questions for Lacey, please, you can drop those in the chat, and we will have time after all of our speakers go to talk a little bit more with all of our speakers and learn more about their work. So I did drop Lacey's links in the chat. It's really wonderful. I think, I mean, disasters literally tear our communities apart. And I think they literally isolate us, and they emotionally isolate us. And so seeing those kinds of efforts that are literally bringing folks together, literally putting a piece of themselves back into the community, back into this space, it's really beautiful to see. And wonderful comment in the chat from Lauren. And I think if folks have other examples of compelling art projects that they want to share, please share those in the chat. Next, I want to hear, or hope to hear, from Amy Jo Hutchison, who's the West Virginia campaign director for Moms Rising. And her community was impacted very recently in the floods that we saw in Wheeling. Absolutely devastating, and absolutely an example of floods coming to places where they never really came before, in some of those communities that were hit. And so Amy Jo is not going to be on camera because she lives in Appalachia and has the broadband to match. So I'll invite you all to speak. So thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Yeah, so we never know when they're going to be setting new poles. That's the newest struggle that we have. Lots of electricity and internet while they set new poles after the flood. But my name is Amy Jo Hutchins. I've been a community organizer for the better part of 10 years, probably just about 10 years, professionally. And stories is really, I say it's the meat and potatoes of my work, right? Because that's what I do. I go into communities here in West Virginia. I do work statewide, and I identify the issues that folks are dealing with. And then we organize and we try to, figure out how can we tell a story to get what we need, right, to fix this. And so stories is really the meat and potatoes of what I do. I always say my political work, I don't believe that changing minds is always possible. Sometimes it feels a lot more impossible. But if we can tell our story from a place of power, and if we can give them something that they're going to remember, something that just connects us and makes them, kind of like levels us out, and just puts the humanity back front and center of the issues that we're dealing with. I think that's how we make change, especially in my political work when it comes to policies that affect women and children. So when the flood struck, I was the only home in my entire neighborhood without any water damage. The flood came about halfway up my yard and took out half my flower bed, and that was all. I'm the only house in my community And so that means that I was able to stand on my porch and watch everyone that I knew lose everything that they had. And so after I came out of my shock, after the first couple of days, I started to look around, and volunteers were coming in to start the mucking process, and our roads were missing. And I mean, it's been described as a war zone, that it looked like a war zone out here. And so I started looking around, and I'm like, what is working? What isn't working? What do we need? And so I was able to use the contacts that I had as an organizer and as someone who's lived here in Ohio County for 30 years to be able to get supplies brought in and dropped in a church parking lot. And so from there, it just ended up being a community hub where we did a little bit of everything. We had therapists there. Um, we had the health department there giving shots. I mean, we had FEMA there. If you can think of them, they were there. We're passing out food. And so one thing that really started happening was, every day people would come into the supply tent looking for whatever they needed. And, for the first few days, we were all in a state of shock. And so most of what we did was just sit and listen to the stories that we had. People just needed to say them out loud, right? Our community had the last census, our population was 662. Over half of our population here in our little town is elderly, over the age of 65. And so it was just devastating on levels to folks. And they just really needed to say things out loud. We lost 9 lives the night of the flood. We lost 3 more following the flood from flood related causes. So loss of 12 lives in a community as small as ours was really hard hitting. And people just needed to listen. And so once I started the blog, I already kind of had my platform with Rattle the Windows, with the organizing work that I'd done back in 2020. I testified in Congress, and that kind of set that whole Rattle the Windows thing off. And so what I found was that when I started to blog and really, just I wanted to focus on the people, and I wanted to focus on the heart of what was happening here. And I wanted to remind people, like, this is life, right? I know it's in the headlines, and one of my biggest fears was that we would just kind of disappear into the headlines, especially with, the current political climate, right? It seems like every day there's something new for us to watch and to become distracted by. And so that was the reason why my blog continued to grow. Um, I've never really been a writer. I just love words, and I've always just kind of dabbled in my own personal time since I was a child. But I was sitting here one night, we were pulling like 14 to 16-hour shifts a day at the supply tent at the church. And it was basically just, if I don't get this out, my head's going to explode. So I really thought it would be something that I would get bored with, a couple of days of a blog entry and then it would end. But what happened was that people started messaging me, people who don't live here, whose parents perished in the flood, um, people who were flood survivors, and they would just reach out to me and tell me how my stories helped them. And so it's really become a thing now. I think I started on day 3 of the flood, maybe. And it's like today is 4 months. We're 4 months out today from the flood. And so it's still going, strong. I do just to kind of we were able to do a lot of things because of the blog, right? And because of the attention it got and the people that it brought in. We ran a 38 days campaign against all of our federal elected officials because it took so damn long. It took 38 days for us to get a FEMA declaration. Right. And so we were able to do that because of the traction and the momentum of the blog. We were just able to do a lot of things. And then I think the last thing I really want to lay on is I spoke at a Bernie rally well over a month ago. And just a couple of nights ago, I was sitting here and I received a text message from someone. And he brought his 11-year-old son to the rally. And I think I probably could have just ended with this, Dana, just said this quote and just let someone else talk. But he wrote to me, "Your words were different than anyone else's because they were accessible. You speak in human terms, not political terms or ideological terms, and you just bring everything home." And, he was talking about how his 11-year-old son really connected to what I was saying because he understood what I was saying. Right. And so I think maybe that's, people are just looking for someone to inspire them and to get them thinking about things. We've had, since then, I mean, we've had a couple community pages, just women who read my blog and were like, hey, this is going to help me too and help other people. And so they actually started Facebook pages where people would go and just share their stories and they would highlight a new story every day. An author friend of mine saw all of this happen and she's like, hey, let's get these stories collected for the library's archives. I mean, so we were able to help and contribute to that in a little bit. And I think, I mean, not only is it therapeutic, right? We're all suffering still from PTSD and grief, so much grief on so many levels. And I think that it's just cathartic and it really just brings us together. One thing that I realized in this flood recovery is that once there is a space built for just fellowship and to share the human experience, especially during trauma, the trauma bonds were strong, right? But once that space is built, I think people are going to come there because it helps so much in these moments to just know that you're not alone and that you don't have to really try to find the words to explain what you're experiencing. Because if you can't find the words, someone sitting there beside you has it. And so I think, maybe that's just it, right? It's just for us to retrain ourselves when it comes to telling our stories and like, how can we alchemize our pain into power? And that's all I have, Dana. Thank you very much for this opportunity. This is fantastic. And I'm already thinking about a mural for Triadelphia. So
I can't wait to see it. I wonder, because I know you did a lot of work to get other folks to share their stories on your website and spent a lot of time collecting them. So just as a little a follow-up question, is there a most powerful story that you found, or was there a moment that made you really grateful and really sure that was just a really important thing for you to be doing?
yeah, I have a social work background too. So I think I should say that. Uh, because listening to people, it's just something that I don't know, that's just who I am, right? I'm that person in the grocery store line that people just come and trauma dump all over, but I'm not complaining. It is, I mean, it's turned into beautiful relationships throughout my life, but the stories here were just so hard. And I think the one story that really stuck out to me, I was asked if I could drop some electrical outlet boxes off at a house of an elderly couple, for a buddy of mine who was helping, volunteering to do some contracting work. And so we went to do that. I went to do that and I met the homeowner for the first time. He was a 79-year-old man. He was very small in stature. He introduced himself to me as Jeff, and I showed him what I had in the bag and told him my friend would be back that evening. And he just started talking. And he told me about the water coming into the house. I think it's important to know, like, my little community had 70 million gallons of water come right down National Roads, Route 40, in less than 30 minutes. I mean, so it was, the water was ridiculous. I have friends who had 13 feet of water on their first floor at their front door. So they're estimating like there were probably 22 or 23 feet of water in some of these homes. But Jeff started telling about the water filling his house, and he was really fixated on his cat. He told me a lot about his cat, watching his cat swim through the house to him. And then he told me a story about how he heard things in the basement breaking and falling over. So this elderly man, fragile man, went downstairs and got stuck. And he was telling me about how at one point he was able to push himself up enough to where his nose was in the rafters and he could breathe. And he ended up ripping all of the tendons in his hands. So his fingers were not in good shape by the time the rescuers came. And I was just standing there in his living room, and there were no walls in the house, right? So it's kind of like we're just standing in the skeleton of his home anyway, of his life. And he's telling the story, and I can just remember standing there thinking, would I have had this man's will to live? And it's 79 years old, not in good health, had everything against you before this emergency happened. And then you were just so determined to stay alive because of your wife and your cats, that you went through all of this, just the stuff that no one can imagine. You can't imagine these stories, they're just so horrific. And it's those moments, right, where I have just been reminded so much of just the beautiful parts of West Virginia people and this resiliency that I swear is in our DNA, and just the determination to stay alive and to overcome. And I think that's probably the most beautiful part of all these stories, is that we've just been reminded of how much life really means to all of us here and what we're willing to do to make sure we can stick around.
Beautiful, and it's important and it matters. So thank you. Thank you for your work sharing those.
Thank you.
I think we can all struggle when we're in these moments of crisis, when there's so many stories like that, and they are all so important and they all need told. And one of the folks who is an expert at wrangling those many beautiful stories together is Madeline McGill from Resource Rural. And she's going to share with us a little bit today about how you move into that space from capturing the stories to finding ways to get them out there, because they are so important and they do matter. So thank you, Madeline, for joining us.
Thanks, Dana. Thanks for having me. Apologies to everyone. There might be a little bit of background noise. I'm at the Minneapolis airport en route from Montana to Kentucky, two great states. I also just want to thank other speakers on this call. I'm so moved by your work. Yeah, and it often takes the most emotional labor for us to talk about the stories that impact us directly. So thanks for your bravery, Amy Jo and Lacey and others. And yeah, glad to be in companionship with you today. My name is Madeline. I'm the communications director for a group called Resource Rural. And you can see a little bit more info about that in the chat. We are essentially a free comms shop for anyone who wants to tell stories about how rural people are investing in our economies, creating jobs, doing good work, and leveraging public funding. And I think when I tell people that I do this work, one of the reactions is, oh, so you tell stories of farmers who lost their USDA funding, or you tell stories of hospital closures or school closures. And kind of like what Amy Jo just said, for us, it's actually much more leading with the resilience of rural communities rather than the ruin. And trying to find ways where there are so many powerful stories to tell, some of which you just heard on this call. How do we bring production capacity, writing, video, photo, digital, social content to some of these stories that need to get out into the world to help shift the broader narrative about what's possible in our communities? And through the Resource Rural program, we have a team of 15 creatives across the country, anything from researchers, investigative journalists, videographers, producers who work with organizations and advocates to help make sure we can create media around our stories. My background is in community organizing. I come from Colorado and Utah, where I got my start co-founding an organization called the Rural Utah Project. I now live in Montana, but my folks actually are one of the many people who retired to Asheville about 10 years ago, which we can pin for a later conversation. But the story I wanted to tell is actually about my dad, who was a career FEMA employee. He used to work helping coastal cities recover from disaster in the Delta. And when he moved to Asheville, man, I, like so many of us, just wanted the best life for my parents. I was so glad for their safety and their comfort and to enjoy their later years in peace and quiet. And so when I couldn't get a hold of them for a few days during Halloween last year, I was absolutely gripped with panic. I was trying every which way, especially to get a hold of my dad. And when he finally picked up with the phone on day 3, I expected him to also echo my panic, but instead he sounded almost animated. He was like, I rigged up a generator for the whole neighborhood and I'm siphoning gas and I've got, I've got neighbors charging their cell phone in the basement. He was just all over the place. And my panic immediately evaporated and I think was replaced with a much more complicated emotion, which was pride. I was proud of my dad's capability. I was proud of what we might call his one-man resilience hub action in his neighborhood. But I do think it raises this complicated nexus of what disaster means within our rural communities. And for me in the West, it's wildfire. We have flooding of its own kind in the Southwest, of flash floods and other ways that soil is not holding water in ways that it used to. But everyone can speak the language of how a disaster tests community bonds, how it asks us to look at what we're made of, and ultimately to lead with resilience and not ruin, and kind of reframes that resilience not as an act of individualism, but as a collective act. And so you can see in some of the stories that Dana dropped in the chat, that's what we try to focus on, to try to challenge the myth of dependency that is often told of rural communities, and point to how places like Appalachia's progress didn't start with federal aid or with FEMA, and it won't stop without it, and how these communities have been leading solutions for decades, and the rest of us honestly should just pick up and follow their lead and help it scale. And how we can connect that adaptation to investment is the next part. How can we leverage these stories to make the case of the proof that when we meet community know-how, like my dad and so many others, how these places can lead in innovation, even when federal funding disappears or falls short. And so I'll say that, yeah, once again, really grateful to hear about this work, very grateful to be en route to Kentucky right now to meet with our storytelling team at Resource World to talk about how we can start to tell more stories in this region. And that in general, I'm an open door and would love to hear what kind of media and messaging you're hoping to create within your towns and organizations. And we're happy to provide free resources however we can. So thanks, Dana, for having me on. And yeah, happy to chat afterwards.
Yeah. One thing Amy Jo mentioned was the importance of kind of saying things in a plain way that folks can understand. I wonder if you have any learnings along those lines, or any examples or other learnings that you might want to echo out to us from both as a storyteller and a person who's probably viewed a lot of stories and really thought about what really resonates with you.
Oh, yeah, happy to talk about it. It's interesting for those who are listening in who are like fellow messaging geeks or like narrative thought folks. We often, as communicators, say how important it is to open stories with shared values. And that's all well and good. I'm sure we're all aware of our own values and kind of how we relate to the world in that front. But it's really hard to sit down with someone and say, okay, Dana, like, tell me how hard of a worker you are. Like, we can know hard work is a shared value, but it's difficult. No one talks like that, right? And so instead, when we sit down with someone and we say, what do you like about the community that you call home? Like, what's important to you here? What are some ways that you see your community innovating? What are some of the coolest things that you're doing this year that you can't wait to try? What is something about the place that you live that no one knows that you wish people knew? Like, what do you wish people knew about West Virginia? It's so easy to find those values when we lead with curiosity and we listen to what people tell us, but that the messaging frameworks that are delivered down to us often from national organizations that are like, name hard work, name working families, that only takes us so far. It's a place to start, but finding the actual language that communities use to talk about that fabric that I mentioned earlier, I think is where the sauce really lies.
I love that. I love that. I love that question. What do you wish people knew about where you live? So I'm going to ask Willa Johnson with Invest Appalachia that question. What do you wish people knew about where you live? And yeah, tell us more about your work.
Yeah, so I have launched a project called Worthy Ground with Invest Appalachia. And Invest Appalachia's focus has been bringing in pooled capital resources to distribute for economic opportunities within Central Appalachia. And of course, disaster has become a pivotal part of that story. It's hard to escape the reality that we are in. That disaster has been impacting us faster and faster. For me, the story has been really personal. So for nearly 20 years in Central Appalachia, I've been doing everything from community organizing to media literacy training to grant writing, but storytelling has always been the tool I use to do those jobs. And I went through a disaster myself when I was in 6th grade when a coal silt pond burst, and we had to evacuate my home. And then again in 2022, when I lost my home in the floods here in East Kentucky. But along the way, each time, before and after, I'd also done mutual aid projects around the wildfires in Gatlinburg, the tornadoes in West Liberty, and then Hurricane Helene. And the thing I keep realizing, and the thing that really draws me to this work, is we talk about resiliency. And this is like what I would want people to know. We talk about resiliency, and sometimes when you're in the middle of having to be resilient, that feels so exhausting. And that word can feel like you're not hearing, like you're not being heard. But what I'm trying to do is reclaim the word resiliency into one that I can be proud of, and the one that Appalachia can be proud of. Resiliency doesn't have to just mean grit. Resiliency can mean thriving. Resiliency can mean hope. Resiliency can mean opportunity for what we learn from these disasters. And so through Worthy Ground, we've launched a website here, and shout out to my colleague, Lauren Sowers at Invest Appalachia, for really helping shape my branding and everything and the website. But trying to create a central landing page to collect these stories. After Helene, I worked with Appalachia Funders Network to really organize those first few months of funders and organizations throughout the region who were trying to recover. And we talked a lot about data. And then, when you live through it, you hear a lot about the stories. And then you would go talk to FEMA as a survivor. And there's just so many sectors and so many components that storytelling really has to be the thread that weaves everything together so that people can learn, people can feel heard and acknowledged, but also people can share what they've learned with others. And so that's really why being able to do this has felt really critical, is because being able to reach across state lines as we learn from each other through Helene, through the 2022 floods, through the Gatlinburg fires. How do we learn from each disaster we go through so that it doesn't feel as heavy the next time it hits the next community? There's already a level of preparedness. There's already a level of here's what can happen. And also, how do we encourage funders and policymakers to know that we're still worth investing in here in the region, that we're here because we love the region, and that there's a lot of life still left here, and that resiliency is an opportunity for them as well.
Willow, would you like me to show your video?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so this is the Worthy Ground. This is the teaser for Worthy Ground to really introduce the project. One thing about the project I'll say before we play it is that currently each video has a 4-part series that focuses on a community as it's recovering from a disaster. So we really had to start with East Kentucky because that is the 2022 floods is really what brought me to this work. But we will go on. We are filming currently in Southwest Virginia about Helene recovery, and then East Tennessee, and a lot of the smaller communities that really do not get a spotlight shined on them and need to feel heard, to feel validated in their experiences, to need that time to heal, but also to share what they can provide for others as well. So this is the teaser trailer to sort of launch Worthy Ground as a whole.
Sorry, Will, it was showing the opposite windows for some reason. Is it, so I'll just like toggle through until we find it. Is it, are you seeing my screen? Are you
I
just saying,
am not.
It just says you've started screen sharing, but you're not in the right mode or something.
okay.
Technology's great till it isn't.
Okay, I'm gonna try something else. Okay. Are we seeing it
Yes.
now?
Yes,
Great.
there you go.
All right, let me just. Okay, are you seeing full screen?
Perfect.
Has been shaped by floods. My life has been shaped by floods and recovery. The way water shapes stone. I have been weathered by rising waters, and that has taught me the meaning of resilience. I was born and raised in Letcher County, Kentucky. As a child, I watched a coal silt pond break and sweep away a neighbor's home. In 2022, the Eastern Kentucky floods damaged my own. And just a year ago, Hurricane Helene reminded us again how fragile and determined our communities are. These disasters are not just dates on a calendar. They are mile markers on a road too many Appalachians must travel. That is why I have started Worthy Ground, a storytelling project of Invest Appalachia dedicated to documenting disaster and recovery in Central Appalachia. Through film, photography, and narrative, we lift up the voices of neighbors, families, and organizers rebuilding their lives. Because our future is worth investing in. This is and always will be Worthy Ground.
So beautiful. What a powerful piece of work, Willa.
Thank you. And if you go on the website as well, we are creating a newsroom page where we'll be sharing stories throughout the region as a way to really collect and condense the work that everyone is doing. And so being here today and hearing so much of the wonderful work that's happening, there's power in numbers of us telling the story, of us advocating for our region. And so really building this as we go, as a way to collect and advocate for the region for ourselves.
Thank you so much. I wonder if you can tell us, Willa, because you've been at the storytelling from both sides of the picture, where I feel like you've had folks coming into your life and asking for your story, and you've done the same. I wonder if you've learned any lessons about because there is so much trauma, because it is so personal, that because you are asking folks to relive one of the worst things that's ever happened to them. Are there lessons that you've learned or things that you wish folks knew about how to hold the sort of responsibility of that storytelling?
Yes. And it's really, one of the things that really made me realize that focusing on disaster recovery was really critical, was because I had experienced it from both angles. And then the days after Helene, without a camera, without a reason other than I just remember what it was like when people brought us food as we were mucking at our homes, and just realizing you hadn't ate that day, and suddenly someone would show up with a hot dog and you're like, oh yeah, we're starving. And so after that initial day, we took sandwiches, ham sandwiches, chips to Greenville, Tennessee. And we got to a subdivision that half of the neighborhood was under 6 feet of water and the other half wasn't. But no one had power. They were sitting on their porches watching their neighbors lose everything. And we were handing out sandwiches, and people true to Appalachian Forum would say, oh, I didn't get hurt as bad as my neighbor. I don't need anything. And that is the mentality I hold on with me when I go in to do interviews, is that the trauma from a storm and the trauma from these disasters in our small communities impacts everyone. And it impacts everyone differently, but it doesn't make it any less than. And so going in and really trying to hold space to allow people to honor what they've been through has been really healing for me. And I think healing for some people in return, to feel validated that they can talk about what they went through. But also, like when I go in, a lot of what I say is, I talk a lot in my interviews, so there's a lot of editing on my part, but it's very conversational because I want people to know I understand, and like they are free to share or not share what they would like. A lot of the footage I use is collected from them so that I know that it's footage they feel comfortable with and not exploited with. And so creating a lot of space, but also one thing that I'm learning is that people haven't felt heard in general, whether it be through the recovery process with their insurance or FEMA or the news stations or just whatever. They haven't felt heard. And so I think people are really still asking. And 3 years later here in 2022, for the floods here in 2022, people are still wanting to be heard. And honestly, it takes years to process what you've been through before you can talk about it. And so that's the real thing, is like providing space where people can feel comfortable, relate, but also feel like they're finally getting to share what they've went through, and that their experience mattered to someone outside of themselves. Because when the disaster hits, it's so big, it's so complicated. And when you live in a small town and everyone is impacted, sometimes there's just not that outlet for you to share why this was so devastating for you. And I will say I have to take lots of, especially editing days, lots of like breaks away from the computer, because people are sharing really heavy stories. And it's the one thing I'm walking away with the most, is that mental health is so critical in our communities right now. And not just mental health, I would say physical health. Nearly everyone I'm interviewing either tells me about a stroke, a heart attack, or some illness they've had, and they'll be in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and have been healthy until disaster. And some of it is just, it happens, but also there's definitely correlation between communities who've been through a huge stress event, and how that access to healthcare and mental health care really impacts their ability to heal.
It does. It does. And it affects everybody. And thank you for bringing that up. And also thank you to the person in the chat. I'm gonna I want to say thank you, Liam. I'm gonna pull up a little. Our speakers have asked so many fantastic questions, and I want to turn a few of those questions from the speakers back to the audience. And so, if you'll see here the question, what do you wish people knew, as a typo, about how disasters impact communities? Because I'm so grateful to the speakers for sharing their stories, and I feel like there's probably so many people who are on this call who have their own stories to share, who have their own insight into those stories that they want told. So I'm going to put that up on the screen, and so you can click on that link, and your answer comes up. While we're waiting for some of those answers to pop up on the screen, I want to echo what Willa said about taking care of yourself, about the emotional weight. And one of the questions I always ask speakers, which our speakers can be ready for this, is what's something you learned the hard way that you can share with us today, and save us the trouble of learning it the hard way. So I'll ask y'all that in a little bit as the speakers. But when we did the mutual aid webinar, I think every single speaker said something along the lines of that you have to take care of yourself if you want to take care of other people. And so I just wanted to, say that is something that all those fantastic mutual aid leaders in our region have learned the hard way. And I'm guessing it's something that a lot of y'all storytellers who are capturing these stories have also probably learned the hard way, because it's real work to do it right, to do it well. You have to do it in the more vulnerable way. So, yeah. You can't pour from an empty cup. I love that, Chris. That's wonderful. And thank you, Jason, for sharing your resources in the chat about the disability and disaster archive work that you're doing. Absolutely want to point folks to those resources, and we'll share those out with the email we send out after the event, just so you know. It's a marathon. It's a marathon and a sprint. I think that's one thing. Somebody said that once, and that really resonated with me, that it's a marathon and a sprint. And the loss is not only dollars. And I'm going to take us to the arts can help. I'm going to zoom in on that question, and I'm going to ask another question to the audience, which is, what is the role for storytelling in the arts? How have you seen, or how would you want to see, if you haven't seen it yet, how can you imagine the arts being maybe a piece of the puzzle as to how you get out those messages that we wish we were out there, about how long the recovery is, that the damage is in more than dollars. So how do you tell the story or paint the picture of what the damage is if it's not dollars. How do we tell that story? And we had folks who were kind of telling this story from the visual arts perspective, from the video perspective, and through the power of words. So we can integrate first person perspectives into a big and challenging story. Yeah. And memorialize. Keeping record of the human perspective beyond data and the scientific impact. Exactly. Collaborative mural and art exhibition for community and our affordable housing redevelopment from local artists, community members, and residents. That sounds beautiful. Share a link to that. If you got a link to that, if you got pictures, folks would love to see that. That sounds absolutely inspiring. Oh, interviewed, wrote the stories, and will perform a theatrical production in December. How exciting, Kat. If you have information on how folks can learn more about that, absolutely share that as well. And we can get that out to people that attended or attending this webinar. There's been, every time I've heard of an example of folks using theater to tell a complex story and capture a moment, it's tends to be one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. So I really appreciate that y'all doing that work. The length of the aftermath. Yeah, it's years. And one of the questions we asked is on the mutual aid webinar and in our other webinars in the series is how the story keeps going after the cameras go somewhere else. And one of the examples we mentioned was with in Wheeling, they had the flooding in June, and not very long after that, there was the very severe flooding in Texas. Now, both of those things were absolutely heart-wrenching, but what that meant in this very strange and surreal way was that the fundraising for the Wheeling area that you can get when you have that half a minute of national attention was cut short. It's such a strange world to live in where that's a dynamic at play, but how do you tell that story that it lasts longer than just that minute we're on TV? So I really appreciate folks putting some answers in the survey. I wonder if any of our speakers, if any of these are resonating with them, or if there's anything you would add looking at these answers pop up. We're moving into the Q&A portion. So if folks have questions for us, please share those in the chat, or you can come off mute and share those. And then if our speakers, if these answers are bringing anything up for our speakers, I'd love to hear it from y'all too. Move this down a little. Data for decades later. Yes, even decades later. Well, I might open up to our speakers with that question I referenced earlier, which is what you've learned maybe the hard way that you can help folks with by sharing it with them for now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but if you do want to keep dropping answers in, the form is still open and we can share that with folks after the event. Maybe we can go in order, Lacey. I don't know if you have anything that you've learned or any big reflections, seeing all those answers or anything.
Yes, yeah, those reflections were amazing. And I think that the arts can be overlooked sometimes. When something like this happens as a way of recovery or just helping people, I saw one included the word belonging, which I really thought was important. Something I didn't highlight earlier. I don't know if you all remember seeing the RC Cola bottle broken in the video that was played for my piece. And that came from Lee Burke, who lives in Neon, Kentucky. And their dad collected 200, I think he said 267 RC Cola bottles. And his dad had passed away a year or two before the flood in 2022. And then his mom had passed away or just earlier this year. And after the flood, though, those 267 bottles were swept away. And Lee searched and searched for these bottles, and he found one whole bottle and then one that was broken. And he decided to give the broken bottle to this piece, this mosaic piece. And that like touched me so deeply. There's been so many times people have told me their stories about the pieces that they've included, and it has just made me cry. You know, it's like these are pieces that these are things that they feel so important, and they want to include in a larger piece with the community. And I think to Willa's point and what you had said about the mutual aid folks, that like taking care of yourself is like, and your mental health is extremely important. Because a couple times I have had to step away from this mosaic work just a little bit because the stories can be so heavy. But after the flood here in 2022, like I lost my studio, my husband lost his business, but you know, we didn't lose our homes. We didn't lose our lives. But right before that, I had been diagnosed with an epilepsy, a form of epilepsy. And so I was going so hard after that for so long, after the flood, that I was basically told by my doctor, like, you need to slow down, like this isn't good for you. And so I think that's one thing that I learned the hard way is like, you know, I need to take care of myself. Yeah, you can't pour from an empty cup. And it's hard to do that when you see people struggling and you see people in pain, but you have to find the time and the balance to like take that time for yourself and try to step back and breathe a little bit. So I guess that's my answer to that.
Judy Bonds, who was the environmental activist many years in West Virginia, personal friend of mine, but she used to say it's like a flock of geese that flies in a V. And they fly in the V shape to break the wind and make the path easier for the people behind them, but they all take turns at the point of the V. And so if you watch them long enough, one will come up from the back and go to the front. You can't always be the point of the V. That's what he always used to say. I always think of that. So
that's really important, I think, to realize. Yes.
Amy Jo, do you have any reflections for us?
Listen, I'm sitting here like, I'm sitting here like, hey, I didn't do that. So I've been on paid leave for 6 weeks to take care of my mental health. Honestly, I think a lot of times, you know, it's just, especially in these disasters, everything just seems like you have right now to do it, whether that's talking to someone, you know, but there's just such an urgency because there is just so much that needs to be addressed and acknowledged. And so I didn't really do a good job of taking care of myself, to be honest with you. But I do want to say, I also think, especially in these rural Appalachian towns, you know, they're blue collar and like these people have worked hard all their lives. And I think one thing that I've really tried to frame in my head is that resilient isn't always a compliment, right? It's not always the compliment that we think it is, because sometimes it feels like a freaking curse, right? So like, and just like little things like that. And I've also, lately the men are the ones who are starting to share their stories with me. And so for me, that's a lot heavier, right? For a lot of reasons, but just because I'm thinking it's taken 4 months for them to realize that they need to say this out loud. And so whenever it comes to mental health, the word healing is being thrown around here a lot, but it took a long time for that word to make it right to the front page of the town. So I think it's also because and I'm pretty much basing this on the people I do life with and my family, but like, I think sometimes we use that word resilience as just kind of like a cover up for really not wanting to admit that, hey, you know, I could use somebody to hold me up for a minute. And I think that's probably one thing that I want people to take huge caution with is like, this stuff is hard, you know, and I mean, I've been in therapy for over a month, and the other day I remembered things that I forgot that I didn't remember. Right. And so it's like things are just constantly every day. And, you know, everyone's like, well, you need to back out of it a little bit, Amy Jo. And and take care of yourself. And I'm like, what they don't understand is that there's no backing out of this, right? Every time I open my door, something is missing that was just there, right? Or there are people who I knew or people who I live beside who I may never see again because they left. It was too much for them this time and they left. And so I think maybe that's really take care of yourself, but also like, I think whenever we ask people to be so vulnerable with us, to really manage the way that we're accepting that and holding those situations, you know, like maybe they don't need resilience to make them feel better in the moment. Maybe they need the word resilience to give them permission to cry because of everything that means that they have to hold. And so that would be my word of caution.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it's that's very real. I'm just checking the chat. We have an extremely pragmatic question in the chat that I would love to get to you on this webinar. I do want to make sure I want to check in with Willa and Madeline and see if y'all have any reflections sort of on this part. And then I think we might move into some of this really practical question just about the nuts and bolts of how we do some of this work.
Yeah, I'm like eyes locked on the chat right now. I also want to lift up a question by Melinda on how can we tell the stories of collaboration between communities, agencies, and the individuals that were affected. I think this is where my biggest learning has been, which is, yeah, we need block grants and disaster recovery funding, and everyone needs grants. The hardest thing for me in this work is that the people who have the best ideas, which are often local folks in rural communities, are not the people that are always getting that funding. And so telling the stories of federal aid and how public funding is necessary, an important component of recovery and resilience, and just generally making the case for our regions as a whole. I still, sometimes I admit, struggle personally when I find these amazing local storytellers who are like, I have an idea for a resilience hub, or I have an idea for a community benefit, and can't navigate the red tape, or can't find the person to talk to, or the agency doesn't have boots on the ground. And so, yes, telling stories of collaboration, but also how do we point to the good ideas that people have locally and how those ideas deserve to be scaled and invested in and listened to. Yeah, and I'll pass it to Willa with that.
Yeah, I think there's so many things I've learned, so it's really hard to narrow down on one train of thought. But one thing that keeps coming up for me in multiple interviews I've done recording folks and then also being interviewed myself as I talk about this project is that in every disaster, I'll backtrack. In years of learning and teaching Appalachian media, there's always been this desire for people to hear us, for people to hear Appalachians and to acknowledge our experience the way we see it, the way we tell it, and to let us tell that story. And then in all of the interviews I've done and interviews I've conducted, there's always this point of when the storm hits, we lose communication. And it's always the most emotional part. It's the part that was traumatic for me. It's the part where I can hear folks talking about how they couldn't get a hold of their family members or they couldn't call out for help, whether it be Helene, whether it be the floods here in Kentucky. There's just always this really traumatic point of not being able to be heard. And that's really what I keep holding on to, is that this region is just so desperate to be heard amongst ourselves, amongst others, and that there's beauty in what we're all doing in different ways and giving voices to so many folks who have felt so unheard for so long. And so I hold those like really sensitive moments of that anxiety from the storm with me as I think about how do I tell these stories, because people literally fought for this opportunity to be heard. And I'm also trying to really hold, as we talk about resilience, how do we continue to have this conversation and encourage hope in a way that makes it feel realistic and possible, because we don't want to sit with the heaviness all the time. So taking those breaks for ourselves is also just really crucial.
Thank you, Willa. And one thing I say a lot is, the work can be really serious and the stories are serious as they should be, but one way we can kind of honor the importance of the work is to approach it practically and get the work done. So with that in mind, we have this very practical series of questions in the chat about how do you find a person in the community that can get the story to you. So as we sort of sat with the sort of beauty and importance of stories, let's think about some of those just like really practical tools that we need and that we use to get those stories out. So Willa, I know you've done a lot of education in this field. I don't know if you want to lay out some basics for folks just from your perspective as an educator. I might toss it to you first because I have a feeling you've given this speech a few times before. And then other folks can add on to it.
Well, it sounds really simple, but for me, it's always to find the social butterfly in whatever community you're going to. And often it's some sort of community organizer or city hall council member, someone who's making things happen. And from there, I'm always trying to cover the whole story. So once I identify a community, for me, it's really, that's a little bit more organic for me, like a community that I'm looking to cover is Beuladine, North Carolina. And that's simply because I drove through it after the storm and after Helene and just saw firsthand the devastation. And so then I start to reach out until I find someone who seems invested and is connected. And that could be a church member, that could be someone from the volunteer fire department. But then I start asking and building questions out. And so one thing I'm trying to really do when I cover storytelling is to find someone who worked in mutual aid, find someone who worked in local politics, who had to handle that emergency, the emergency the first 2 days after, someone who was personally impacted, someone from an organization in the region, and my brain just went blank as I was saying this. And someone from a nonprofit usually. So just trying to cover all bases of like what makes a community tick. What are all the sectors that bring a community as one? They might not all interact with each other daily, but they're all carrying a huge part of the story as we recover. And they all carry a huge part of the story from the disaster itself. And so just trying to cover all of my angles. But typically it really does come down to finding one good resource, putting the call out amongst your network, and then really honing in on that resource and building a good trust-based connection with them.
We've talked in previous calls about how the busybodies are the heart and soul of this work. And so you got to find, and what a treasure they are because they know everyone's business and man, they save lives. So, and they get this and they know. So that's such a great point, Willa.
Yeah.
Madeline, would you have anything to add to that or kind of your own perspective? And I think you often come in, Willa's kind of coming in on day one from that angle, and you're coming in maybe on day 100 or 200. So how does that differ and what does that look like?
Totally. And I'll defer to folks like Willa who are doing that organizing on the ground. I think the perspective coming into the story nationally is obviously a little different. Like if someone says, I have a flooding story in Kentucky and I'm in Montana, it's, like I'm not navigating roads in the same way that folks are in that state. But what I can say is that it raises a lot of ethical questions when you're trying to support a community to tell a story that you're not a part of. And one of those questions is, should you be the person telling this story? Should you be trying to block roads with your producer crew when folks are just trying to figure out how to survive? And sometimes the answer is no. And if you are in a position where you can be helpful, it's probably by redistributing resources. So for us at Resource Rural, it's like, all right, I know Willa is in this community. Can we move Willa $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 so that she can organize locally and create media that we can then be helpful amplifying? And so I think there's ways, yes, money. I wish I could do so many other things from Montana, but it is one way that we can say thank you. And it's one way we can support each other. And I think looking at the costs associated with storytelling and making sure we're compensating people for that emotional labor is a really big part of this work. The last thing I'll say is that coaching people to tell their own stories, empowering them, or sometimes even giving permission, asking for, so that people can create at-home content. When we watch news or TikToks or other media platforms, we're relying a lot on people whipping out their cell phones, recording a flood in their front yard, and then sending it to a local news station. And as nonprofits, asking our supporters, our members, our volunteers, folks who may not even know how to use a cell phone that well, to get equipped to feel comfortable also recording, and then us stitching together that footage, helping tell the bigger story. Mixing media is a big piece of, I think, where we need to go to utilize all of the tools we have available to us. So everything Willa said, plus a few ethical considerations.
Yeah, and we have folks from both perspective on these costs, you know, folks who are coming from a national perspective and folks who are coming from a super local one. So it's really helpful to have both angles provided. Great. Ken, your hand is up. What you have a question?
Yeah, I'm actually really curious. Just so folks know, I'm a psychiatrist. I've been working. I'm here in Pittsburgh, and I've been working on a lot of disaster-related activities and concerns for many years, beginning with the airplane crash outside of Pittsburgh over 30 years ago, where 130 people just were eaten by the earth, and many things after that. And currently working with folks in East Palestine. One of the things I want to know, though, is if folks have had any experiences with the storytelling and ways of commemorating or describing the processes of people recovering that capture that process and are in some sense part of the healing itself. And I'm going to give a specific example of this that I've seen, and it was really very impressive. It's a little bit unrelated to climate change, but it's sort of related to stuff that's happened in Appalachia, I think, in general, and over the last 40, 50 years. And that is in the city of Newcastle, England, which is an industrial place where all of the industry just basically died. They really struggled after that, and we've had that happen in Appalachia, and it's still happening. One of the things that they did was they constructed something called the Angel of the North, which is a soaring statue. It's really worth Googling, Angel of the North, with the remnants of some of the plants, of the steel plants and armament plants that they had. So it all forged into this huge statue that you can see it. They put it on a mountain or a hilltop, and you can see it from everywhere. And people, when I was there, would take me out of their house or out of their business and say, I just want to make sure that you see the Angel of the North, because that's the story. That's who we are. And that's how we're looking into the future. We are strong and powerful, even though we've had these terrible calamities, and we are going to make a future for ourselves. And you can see it in that statue. So they would put me out there, and it's true, you could see it. But the most important thing was what the people felt and thought about it. And I'm just curious if anybody's had anything kind of similar in their experiences happen. Is there anything that captures the story or tells the story in itself or being that people have had in response to the flooding and the various other kinds of challenges that people have faced? Sort of, I guess, a dynamic memorial, a healing memorial. If anybody's been able to make that happen, or if we figured out how to do that. Does that make sense?
I think Lacey's work is the keystone example of what's possible there. And Lacey, I have a feeling, with being in the focus you do, you may know of other examples too that have inspired you as well.
Yeah, I would like, there's so many people that have come when they give the piece of, there's been people that have given river glass for the mosaic that washed up after the flood and they found it in their yard. There's people that have given mason jar, they would can food and they had mason jars. And after the flood, they had to throw all their jars of food out. And they would bring me the mason jars that they recovered, you know, just the glass and stuff. So I think there is a healing in wanting to be part of this larger piece. The whole piece, this mosaic, is called Pieces of Home, Stream of Stories, because we're taking all these little thousands. I mean, there's thousands of pieces from people all over the community, right? And we're putting them in this larger piece, and it is creating a stream of the stories. And so we want to, you know, we have such, anybody that's in a, has been through a flood, I think has such a odd relationship with water. You know, we need water to survive. And every time it rains really hard, you get really nervous. And I think Willa said that everybody here, whether or not they were affected by the flood, have some sort of PTSD because they were in the situation with everybody else. So yeah, I think there's been such a great so much great feedback around these projects that uplift the communities. I would like to think that it's a healing way for people to be included and involved, and it's not time consuming for them, right? They can know that they have put something into this piece, and they feel good about that, and they can go and find it later and know that it's there, and they'll know where it is forever. As long as that wall's standing, that mosaic should be there. So I think that, yeah, this work to me is very healing, and I think many people in the community would agree with that. I'm trying to think of anybody else that I know, and I'm sure there are other people in the area. Nothing is coming to mind right off. Willa may know somebody around here that's making work that would be healing as well.
Yeah.
Willa, do you want?
Go ahead, Willa.
Yeah, I love that question. And something that I thought of that I have been giving advice on multiple 1-year milestone calls around Helene is I actually worked at Appalachia when the floods hit in 2022. And so, you know, I woke up and had lost my home, my son's school, my church, the place where I worked and grew up essentially. And so the year after, we spent time making a film called All Is Not Lost. That was really just an interview of documenting the recovery for the community in that year. And when it came time to debut the film for the 1-year anniversary, so this isn't a physical memorial, like so much as it's like a constant reminder, but it was the use of art that was a really healing opportunity for us, is that we were talking about like, how do we debut this film? How do we roll it out? How do we mark the 1-year anniversary without putting a ton of work on ourselves because we're exhausted? And the one thing I kept coming back to is that we hadn't mourned yet. You're just running on adrenaline. I do not remember the first year after that flood. I don't remember Christmas. I don't remember Halloween. I don't remember moving in my new home. And so when that 1 year hit, I was like, I haven't had time to mourn. And so instead of, sorry, I'm at the city hall and they're doing construction work, so if y'all can hear that. But when we came time to show the film, we were like, we don't need a big event that has lots of pomp and circumstance. We needed a wake. We needed a space for a community to finally get together in a way they hadn't been able to get together. They didn't have churches. They still hadn't fully opened their schools. And so we had a community screening outside at night. We cooked food the way you would bring chicken after a funeral here. We just let people play board games. And we set up a portrait studio just outside where families could come take portraits, family portraits together, and have them sent to them for free to replace the things they had lost, because many of us lost pictures in the flood. And so it was just this really simple gathering of, let's just spend a couple hours together talking without anyone facilitating. And then we watched the film once it was dark. And one of the women in the film, who's an artist who had lost everything, just her home was destroyed, had said, this is the first healing moment I have felt in a year. And it was just because she got to have that sense of community. And I think using art to gather people was a real opportunity there for that. And so that's what in this work I do now, is to say that 1 year does not have, you do not put a ton of work on yourself. Do not put a ton of pressure on yourself. The adrenaline is just wearing off. But I think us thinking about ways to use art to create those spaces is really what's so critical and uplifting about the work we do. And especially Lacey's work, I see it constantly. We're in the same community of people pitching in and coming out to help her because they want that community that comes with art.
That's beautiful. And one of the questions I was going to ask was, why art? And I think you just answered it, Willa. So thank you. Though, if any of our speakers have any extras, like why the arts, what does that do that, the other mediums and the other ways, reimagine. We do a lot of reports. We do a lot of policy lists of policy. And I love my policy lists. You'll never take them away from me, but we know that that's not the whole piece. You need that other component. I also want to lift up, I think sometimes that sort of monument will be something that's physical that you can point to on the hill, on a hill or on a concrete wall, as it were. But I think sometimes it's, Willa's website, Amy Jo's website, it's a video, it's an Instagram or even a Facebook group, so much community can be found in those spaces. And so I think there are a lot of ways that people, kind of big and small, can capture and memorialize so many pieces of this. So I do want to say we have sort of the burden of what the social media and the internet brings to us can be exhausting, but it brings some really interesting opportunities to bring folks together that isn't, and then everyone can point to or access in a way that isn't just putting it on the tallest hill. So wanted to say that as well. Though Amy Jo, y'all do have a monument space. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, or if any of our speakers have any last thoughts for us.
Yeah, we had another local church. So our hub actually organically happened at the Philadelphia United Methodist Church, but we had another local church who contacted and asked if we would be interested in crosses, 9 wooden crosses, for the people who we lost in the flood. And so we thought there would be small crosses, but they're really not. They're very nice crosses that are probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 feet tall. And so we noticed, of course, that, the crosses went up as we were still there a lot, like 12, 13 hours a day. But it was just really nice because it's in front of the church where there weren't a lot of people. Our tents had been removed, right, as we try to downsize our recovery efforts. And people stop at all hours of the night at the crosses. The first thing that happened was someone from the community drove past the first night, came back the next day with solar lights. And so now it's just a phenomenal display, in my opinion, in the community's opinion, to drive past the church and just see the 9 crosses lit up. And so people have brought, they started dropping off flowers. And so someone else came behind them and donated, so we could, little flower vases to fit on the side of the crosses now. There's a sister of one of the victims. Travis was 19, who we lost in the flood. And a couple of days ago, his sister came. Halloween was his favorite time of the year. So she came and decorated his cross with cobwebs and plastic spiders. And so, like, I've seen a few pictures of that on Facebook. And it's just really become a place where people can stop when they want to. We had people last night stop for the first time. They said they could finally bring themselves to do it. And again, today's the 4-month anniversary of the flood. But I believe that it is something people can drive past. They can interact with it as they want to, but I think it says something that we know that's always going to be there. Like, that is one thing that we hope is pretty permanent, that we can, kind of lean into and just go and find solace and peace when we need to.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing about that. So I think that's a perfect note to leave on. What's possible when communities come together and the importance of keeping doing it. I really appreciate everybody sharing today. I appreciate our speakers, so much engagement in the chat. If folks have other links to share in the chat, we will put those in the follow-up notes. So please feel comfortable doing that. I think people come on these calls because they do want to network and learn from each other. So absolutely share about your work. We want to see it. Thank you again to our speakers for giving so much of yourself, not only in the last hour and a half, but on and on in your lives and all the different ways that you do. I really appreciate you all, and I'm so honored you were willing to share your very limited and precious time with us today. So thank you all.